So in this video I'm going to cover something that is a huge part of Unit 1 that people seem to have a bit of issue with, because it does involve some forms of calculation and maths and numbers that people often don't seem to really like. But it is an important part of the exam that you understand the difference between sales revenue, gross and operating profit. So I'm going to start with sales. If a company is speaking about sales, that's the amount of units that a business sells. So what are your sales? 500 units a month, 1,000 units a year, 10,000 every day, whatever it is. So sales, quite simply, is the amount of units that you sell on a regular basis. Sales revenue is the amount of money that you make from that sales. So you say, right, my sales last month were 500 units and my sales revenue was £1,000. So that means it must have been £2 per unit, because you sold 500, you made £1,000. So sales is the units, sales revenue is in terms of pounds, how much you've actually made from those sales. But even if you made £1 million sales revenue, that does not mean you are rich. That does not mean that's £1 million profit, because to go from revenue to profit, you have to follow a few steps. Give you an example. Imagine Sarah. She's selling 500 units of her new juice drink. We've had raspberry juice, we've had banana juice, we've had melon juice, grape juice, everything. But the new one is yam juice. It's all about them yams. So she's selling 500 units. That's her sales. And her revenue is £1,000. So must be £2 per unit when she sells it. However, that revenue of £1,000, that's not her profit. In order to work out her profit, she's going to have to take her costs away. When you make a product, there are costs involved. Either you're making the product yourself, and you're going to have to pay for things like electricity, wages for your staff, raw materials. Where does she get the yams from? She's going to need to buy them from somewhere. Even if she doesn't make the product herself, let's say someone else makes the yam juice and she just sells it, well, she's still going to have costs, because how does she get it from the producer? She's going to have to buy it from them to sell it on. So if you make the product yourself, or if you're buying it off someone else to then sell on, whatever the process is, you still have costs, and you still have to take those costs away from your revenue in order to make your profit. So let's say her variable costs are £400. Now, variable costs are costs that change with output. So the more you make, the more variable costs you have. If you make more products, the variable costs go up. If you make less products, variable costs go down. That's how variable costs work. It could be things like cost of buying raw material, in this case the yams. It could be the wages she has to pay her staff. Whatever it is, her variable costs are £400. So she's made £1,000 revenue, and now she's got variable costs. If you take your revenue and you minus your variable costs away, which sometimes are known as cost of sales, you get gross profit. So 1,000 minus 400, £600 gross profit. Gross profit simply means how much did you make from your sales if you've taken away your variable cost. Is that her final profit? Is that it? Did she make £600 profit last month? No. Gross profit is not the final profit. There's still more to be done at this point. So however, Although she has a gross profit of £600, that's not her final profit. Now she needs to take away her fixed costs. We've dealt with variable costs, costs that change with output. Now we need to deal with those fixed costs, otherwise known as overheads or expenses. I've seen in the exam they use fixed costs, overheads or expenses. So you need to know that all three of those mean the same thing. So you've got to take away your fixed costs. Now let's say her expenses, her fixed costs, her overheads, same thing, is £250. Therefore, gross profit minus expenses, overheads, fixed costs is your operating profit. That's your final profit. It's called operating profit. So in this case, she had £600 gross profit. She takes away her fixed costs, her overheads, or what as they call them, these expenses, and she's left with £350 operating profit. So you can see for her, with her yam juice, she started off with £1,000 from sales. That's great, £1,000 sales revenue. But taking away those costs has knocked her final profit down to £350. Now, the question could be, in an exam, how exactly do you make more? She starts off with £1,000. She wants to make more than £350 operating profit. How can you do this? Well, there's two main ways that you do this. Either A, she increases her sales, so either she sells more, or she increases the selling price in order to earn more revenue. She could lower her variable costs. So if you're talking about variable costs, you want to cut those down. You want to have less costs. So maybe what she could do is, if she's getting her yams, her raw materials from one supplier, she could look around, see if there's anyone else who will sell her those raw materials for less money. So she could try to find a new supplier. She could talk to her current supplier and say, look, these are too expensive. We need to do a deal, maybe. So that's something else she could do. If it's about wages, maybe she pays her wages too much, too many wages to her staff. She could put them all on 0-hour contracts. She couldn't just fire people, but she could say, right, from now on, everyone's only working a few hours a week. So you're only coming in when I need you. So she could try and cut her costs that way. She could also try to lower her fixed costs. Now, they're slightly harder to change because they're fixed. So, for example, rent is a fixed cost. So really, if she was going to try and lower her fixed cost, she'd have to move somewhere else, or I suppose renegotiate with the landlord. Can I pay less rent? Something like that. Talk to her electricity company and say, look, is there a different tariff that you can put me on so I pay less money? So fixed costs are a lot harder to cut down than variable costs. That brings us to the end of this section. So just a brief overview. Remember, sales revenue, gross profit, and then operating profit. Now, if you want to go from sales revenue straight to operating profit, you don't want to bother working out gross profit. You want to go straight from revenue down to operating profit. You can do sales revenue minus total cost. Total cost is when you take your fixed and you add your variable together. So total cost. So if you do revenue minus total cost, that gets you straight from revenue down to operating profit, that final profit. So that's a quick shortcut to get there.